Late last year, when I was making countdown videos for just about any topic I can think of, I intentionally left out one particular video. A top 10 worst roller coasters list simply wasn't justifiable at the time because I had not ridden enough bad coasters to formulate an opinion. Now, I have nearly 400 coaster credits under my belt, and although I'm still struggling to come up with an accurate ranking, I think I finally have a collection of 10 coasters I just do not enjoy. The only rules for this list is no kiddie coasters, no family coasters, and no dark ride coasters. Those simply don't fit the criteria that I'm looking for because those rides were built for completely different audiences. What I'm looking at instead are 10 thrill machines that do a bad job at providing an enjoyable ride experience. So with that being said, I hope you all enjoy this one, as even though it's a shorter list, it was one of the more challenging ones I've had to decide on. For that, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, but otherwise, let's get right into the video. These are the top 10 worst roller coasters I've ridden as of September 2021. Number 10, Corkscrew at Cedar Point. Unlike a lot of people, I personally don't hate this ride and also think it has some redeeming qualities, to be honest. If you are in the back car, the drop and first hill can provide some legitimately violent ejector airtime. Other than that, however, you're definitely going to be in for an unpleasant ride experience. The more I think about the ride experience on Corkscrew, the more I feel like I'm showing it too much love for these 2 moments of airtime. It's definitely important that I don't forget how this thing shakes you around like a rag doll. I will say it's nothing that I wouldn't expect from a 1976 Aero looping coaster, but regardless of how this is justifiable, it just isn't a very fun roller coaster. As I said though, I don't hate this ride like a lot of people do. Number 9, Wild West Express at Adventure Park USA. Here's another ride that I also don't really hate, simply for its semi-unique layout and also the crazy twisting drop in the back row. But like Corkscrew, this thing is hot garbage outside of that, and it's something I don't consider often enough. The ride is also in really bad shape, and you can tell it's been through a lot over the years. It originally opened probably from some fair circuit of some kind, but officially opened in 1997 at Old Town near Fun Spot Kissimmee in Florida. In 2015, it moved on over to Maryland, and you can definitely feel that it's a relocation credit. The entire duration of the coaster gives a noticeably shaky ride experience, which is not a good complement to the already janky transitions. Again, I don't hate this ride for the reasons I mentioned, but don't get used to that because from here on out, there are 8 roller coasters that I just do not like. Number 8, Time Warp at Canada's Wonderland and Superfly at Rye Playland. So I put these 2 coasters together because they are exact clones and are more specifically known as the Zamperla Valere model. There is also a third one I've ridden in the US called Soarin' Eagle in Coney Island, but that one actually is not too bad because there's nothing to hit your head against. Unfortunately, the other 2 in North America cannot say the same. Throughout the ride, you will be shaken around in this claustrophobic little cage with these stupid head restraints. Repeatedly, you will be taken through turns, hills, and by far the worst of the bunch, inversions, and it is so uncomfortable. On Soarin' Eagle, the only part I really didn't like were the inversions and the rest were actually fine, but on Time Warp and Superfly, everything is just bad. I really don't know anyone who truly enjoys these 2 coasters, but if you are one of the rare few, feel free to drop a comment down below, I guess. Number 7, Flying Cobras at Carowinds. There isn't a whole lot of Vekoma boomerangs I genuinely dislike, to be honest. And you'd think that this one would be on the higher end of the spectrum for boomerangs for having the newer vest restraints. But for whatever reason, this one shakes you around considerably more than the others I've ridden. That is something that cannot be excused by the updated restraints. As I said, I don't really dislike boomerangs most of the time, and I also don't hate SLCs at all. I actually didn't include any of those in this list. But there are still 2 boomerangs that I could think of that were bad enough to make the cut, and this is the first and slightly less bad iteration of the 2. I actually thought this ride was worse than Nighthawk, Vortex, and Hurler in the same park also, which is probably an extremely unpopular opinion. But for me, I just did not dread riding any of those 3 coasters. As far as I'm concerned, you should do Flying Cobras once for the credit and to maybe see if my ride was an especially bad one, but other than that, I do not recommend doing it more than once when you're at the park. Number 6, Blue Streak at Conneaut Lake Park. To this day, Blue Streak is the roughest wooden roller coaster I have ever ridden. Unfortunately, the ride is currently standing but not operating, and the future of the attraction is in question. But since I got the coaster credit, I don't find it to be all too unfortunate in all honesty. I just said that for those of you who never got the chance to ride it. The reason there's 5 other coasters ranked lower on the list and a couple other wood coasters as well are because Blue Streak's layout is genuinely pretty cool for what it's worth. It's one of your classic out and back formations right in the woods of Conneaut Lake, which is a pretty majestic combination in all honesty. You can also get some mild bursts of airtime with those buzzbar restraints, but the valleys that follow are so atrociously rough that it may be hard to appreciate these moments. Nonetheless, I do hope this coaster reopens rather than closes for good, even if I don't like it, only because it sucks to see old wooden roller coasters hit the scrap heap. As we lose more and more of them, it's like a generation of roller coasters dying out, and that sucks to witness, so here's to hoping more spines can be realigned by this coaster in the future. Number 5, Anaconda at King's Dominion. To be honest, I didn't even think this ride was unbearably rough, but the layout is just so stupid, man. And even if it wasn't as shaky as its reputation suggests, there's still some roughness there that does not help the ride experience whatsoever. What makes the layout especially bad is really the entire second half. The first half of the first half, aka the drop into the tunnel and up into the loop, was not any worse than the beginnings of the other Aero loopers I've been on. But the Sidewinder that follows surely isn't enjoyable, and from there on out, the rest of the ride is just terrible. The mid-course brake run will violently toss you forwards against your restraint, and the rest of the course are these stupid helixes that elevate up and down utilizing god-awful transitions. I also didn't like the corkscrews on this one either, because even though they weren't really that rough, you just take them too slowly. I just don't understand how anyone could get off of this ride and say, yeah, that was awesome. It's one of the worst Aero loopers out there, and is probably the very worst one I've had the chance to experience thus far. Seriously guys, let me help you out. Go ride I-305 next door. There's no reason not to. Number 4, Boomerang at Six Flags Mexico. By a long shot, this is the worst Boomerang coaster I've ridden, and is also the worst roller coaster in this otherwise amazing Six Flags park. I could not believe that Boomerang at this park took the worst parts from all the other Boomerangs I've ridden and forged it into one ride. You've got your horrible lift hill engagements that slam riders against their seats, you've got the course itself which tries to rip your body apart while violently shaking you around, and lastly you've got some terrible braking on this one as well. Now I do recognize that Mexico City's Boomerang is one of, if not the oldest operating Boomerang in the world. This roughness probably should have been expected, and now that I've ridden it, I can definitely see a viable reason as to why it's so awful. But without a doubt, this is a ride that I never plan on experiencing ever again if I head back to this park. Number 3, Grizzly at King's Dominion. Look, don't click off of the video, I know this ride does have its fans. Grizzly probably could have been ranked a bit lower on this list because I do actually appreciate the wooded setting and the secluded nature of the ride experience. I also think the tunnels thrown in here were a decent touch to an otherwise god-awful ride experience also. I first rode Grizzly in the spring of 2018 and came off with one of the worst roller coaster credits I'd ever been on. This was 3 years ago though, so I figured my tolerance for roughness had improved upon and that I'd actually like Grizzly a lot more after rewriting it. After all, I did ride Grizzly's mirror replica at Canada's Wonderland a year later in 2019, known as Wild Beast, and actually thought it was loads of fun. So I headed back to the park this year and took a seat, almost confident that I'd enjoy it more than I did, but still had a worry in the back of my head. First valley after the drop could have been worse, but nonetheless, I rise into the first turnaround and brace myself for what's to come. As much bracing as I could have done though, that could not have saved me from the atrocious jackhammering I had experienced from this point on. Almost the entire layout was this way, and that is something I've seen on so few roller coasters. By the time I hit the final brake run, I was relieved that the ride was over, despite the fact that I felt like I couldn't breathe because I thought Grizzly had fucked my insides from the roughness. Whether or not I give this ride a third chance in the future has still yet to be determined, because I do realize this coaster somehow has its fans. Maybe a night ride on a non-wheel seat would be better, but I just don't know what to believe anymore. As far as my 2 rides in Grizzly, split between 2 separate seasons on 2 separate seats, I think this is still a horrendous sorry excuse for a wooden roller coaster. Number 2, Tidal Twister at SeaWorld San Diego. It's up to you whether or not you want to count this as a roller coaster credit, but I think it qualifies enough to where it is one. But what a sad excuse for a credit this thing turned out to be. Built as recently as 2019 by Skyline Attractions, Tidal Twister is actually the last remaining one of their coasters left. The other one that was built in 2018 was Harley Quinn Crazy Coaster at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, which had a considerably more intense layout than this one. I'm almost confident that that would have made the top spot on this list if it were still operating at that park. As for Tidal Twister, you can tell that they made some minor improvements. For one, it's a much quieter ride, and for two, it doesn't appear to be as rough. I don't actually think Tidal Twister is as rough as many were anticipating, but this does not matter too much when you have the restraints and layout that you do. This attraction is a simple figure 8 layout with an airtime held turn inversion turn. That's it. As you go back and forth to build up speed using drive tires to complete the layout, you can feel the shakiness begin to commence. And this is all while you have the bulkiest restraints I've ever seen on any roller coaster in the world. These trains give you no space to comfortably stay seated, and please do expect some head banging there as well. As for the inversion, it does happen to give some crazy hang time, but with trains like these, I strongly dislike these moments of hang time. But what about the airtime hill? Is that any good? Unless you beat out the odds of getting the very back or very front row, you will not be getting a pinch of airtime, and even in those seats, you can expect some pretty mild floater airtime. But between the restraints, the layout, and the shaky nature of the ride, and did I mention the forcibly slow operations, there was not a single redeeming quality to Tidal Twister that I can think of. I highly suspect that this ride will turn out to have a very similar fate to Harley Quinn in the not so distant future, and that is something I await to see, and honestly, I will not care one bit. Number 1, Wildcat at Lake Compounds. Without question, Wildcat takes the cake for the worst wooden roller coaster I've ridden, and arguably the worst overall roller coaster I've ridden as well. The whole layout is brutally rough as hell, and much of it jackhammers you as well. Wildcat was originally built at the park in 1927, but received an overhaul in 2017 with new GCI Millennium Flyer trains and a full retracking by Martin and Vlemix. From what I hear, this retrack somehow made the ride rougher, which is hard to believe until you actually go and ride Wildcat. It's just so difficult to imagine how bad of a combination the layout is with the roughness without experiencing this piece of trash yourself. Especially because from off-ride, the ride looks like it has some decent potential. But do not fall into the Wildcat trap. Ride it once for the credit if you have to, and never again. I don't know if there's a soul in the coaster community who actually enjoys this ride, but as with the other coasters on this list, feel free to comment down below if you do. Ladies and gentlemen, the following 10 roller coasters have placed high on a list with nearly 400 other roller coasters competing against them. The list in question was the top 10 worst coasters I'd ever ridden, and yeah, I wouldn't recommend any of these rides in all honesty. With that being said, I can't wait to see your comments down below and hear about your least favorite coaster credits and whether or not you agree with my opinions. I'd also invite you guys to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. With that being said, I appreciate you all sticking with me, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys.